In January, the FBI raided the homes of some Albuquerque Police Department officers, along with the local defense attorney's law office. Allegedly, these officers were pulling drivers over for suspected DUI, and then telling them they could have their case dismissed if they only hired a certain defense attorney. But even worse, the Department of Justice has actually been keeping an eye on the APD for the last decade. So how could this corruption be happening in the first place? And how did these officers get caught? Back in August of 2023, Officer Honorio Alba Jr., the New Mexico Mad Officer of the Year, pulled over a driver for going 83 miles an hour at 1:30 in the morning. Officer Alba claimed the driver had bloodshot, watery eyes and the odor of alcohol coming from his face, but the driver was not arrested. Allegedly, Officer Alba told the driver that if he hired a specific defense attorney, he'd be sure to be acquitted, and then Officer Alba let the driver go home. But unluckily for Officer Alba, the driver was a former employee of the 2nd Judicial District Court. His old boss, Court Executive Katrina Watson, wrote a letter to the APD's Police Oversight Agency along with the New Mexico Supreme Court. And then, in January 2024, this happened.
The FBI spent yesterday raiding homes and businesses, including the home of an APD officer and a lawyer's office. The U.S. Attorney's Office of New Mexico confirmed, quote, federal law enforcement activity at those locations in cooperation with APD.
Shortly thereafter, this happened.
District Attorney Sam Bregman called it a punch in the gut when he had to dismiss more than 150 DWI cases.
It made me sick to my stomach. However, I have to follow my ethics as a prosecutor, and I had no choice but to do this.
And then the APD released a statement saying, due to the sensitive nature of the investigation, some officers have been placed on administrative leave, and others will be temporarily reassigned within the department. And what do most of the officers who we know are targets of this investigation have in common? They're members of APD's DWI unit. And yes, that's their actual patch, which is actually pretty fitting since Batman is also a vigilante. It seems a few officers in this DWI unit allegedly took the logo to heart and decided they wanted to do things their own way.
I don't know. I swear to God.
Swear to me!
But the plot thickens as one officer resigns, and then a second, a third, a fourth, and finally a fifth. These guys are under investigation by the FBI. And as a defense attorney, I completely agree with their decision to resign instead of talking to internal affairs. Because what's rule number one here on this channel? Don't talk to the police. The only smart move in a situation like this is to lawyer up and shut up. But what did these officers allegedly do wrong in the first place? As we mentioned before, there was an accusation of extortion. As long as you hire a specific defense attorney, your case will get dismissed. But there's also some video evidence. Here we see Carlos Sandoval Smith being pulled over by an APD officer.
I'm Officer Montano with APD. I stopped at the first meeting.
But the reason for the initial stop doesn't stick.
So when was the last time you had some alcohol?
It was yesterday.
And then the officer has Carlos do some field sobriety tests. And quick side note, don't ever agree to field sobriety tests. They are voluntary in every state and they don't help you get out of trouble. They are designed for the cops to get you further into trouble and hopefully get you into handcuffs. And this is true for Carlos. Despite blowing under the legal limit twice, the officer says,
Hey, I do have to place you in handcuffs and I do have to place you under arrest.
Seriously, sir?
But then the officer suggests Carlos hire a specific attorney, Thomas Clear III. Carlos thought this was a bit suspicious, so he recorded his conversation with Mr. Clear's staff.
In your opinion, what is my next best step to try and not get this on my record? What do you recommend I do?
Well, we charged $8,500 and you could do it in payments.
Okay.
Or you could pay $7,500 up front.
You representing me, that would guarantee that this doesn't go on my record?
Yes.
Carlos was right to be suspicious. If any attorney guarantees you a specific result in a criminal case, walk away. It's 100% against our ethics rules to begin with. And that's because there are no guarantees in court. Even with the best lawyer and the best facts, nobody can guarantee you'll be acquitted until the judge bangs the gavel. So how can this attorney's office guarantee that Carlos won't be convicted? If the officer doesn't show up to court to put on the prosecution's case, it's pretty hard for the prosecution to prove that you ever committed a crime, and there's a high likelihood that your case will be thrown out. And guess what's been happening?
Target 7 analyzed more than 250 DWI cases the attorney handled over the past 4 years. Nearly 70% of his cases were dismissed. Atkinson says a group of officers not appearing 29 times for one attorney is suspicious.
But what's worse than all this going on is that the APD has been under investigation and scrutiny by the Department of Justice this entire time. Back in 2012, the feds opened an investigation into the Albuquerque Police Department. Back then, the APD was accused of using deadly force in situations that didn't require the use of deadly force. APD officers too frequently use deadly force against people who pose a minimal threat and in situations where the conduct of the officers heightens the danger and contributes to the need to use force. Encounters between APD officers and persons with mental illness and in crisis too frequently result in a use of force or a higher level of force than necessary. And in 2014, for their final report in the APD investigation, the feds say, the Justice Department also found systemic deficiencies of the APD, which contribute to these 3 patterns, including deficient policies, failed accountability systems, inadequate training, inadequate supervision, ineffective systems of investigation and adjudication, the absence of a culture of community policing, and a lack of sufficient civilian oversight. As a result, the APD has been under Department of Justice settlement agreement since then. And that's fancy lawyer talk for essentially putting a local police department on probation and having the court monitor things through what they call an independent monitor. Over the years, the APD was starting to get straight A's. However, we still have this alleged corruption that's going on under the surface. In fact, in his resignation letter, Officer Montano said, I thought there would be a time where I could disclose what I knew from within APD and how the issues I let myself get caught up in within the DWI unit were generational. I thought there would be a time where I could talk about all the other people who should be on administrative leave as well, but aren't. So what happens now? At this point, it's clear we have a policing failure on all levels, all the way from your local officer who's pulling you over on the side of the road, all the way up to the federal government themselves. It will likely be months or even years before we have all the information about how far and wide this scandal reaches within the APD, and perhaps even within the federal government. But we'll be sure to update you when we have more important information. And when an officer pulls you over and starts walking up to your window, it's impossible for you to know if they're one of the few corrupt ones or not. So watch this next video to learn specific tricks the police learn to manipulate you so you can defend yourself. And as always, don't talk to the police.